Hey everyone, this is Chris Crazy House, and I am definitely looking forward to the animated series Invincible that is going to be coming on Amazon Prime. For those who don't know, Invincible is a 15-year long running comic book series done by Image Comics. It was one of Robert Kirkman's creations. For those who don't know, Robert Kirkman also created The Walking Dead for Image Comics. And Corey Walker and the artist Ryan Oatley, they came up with the concept together. And I believe Robert Kirkman was saying this was at a time where Image was doing so many different types of stories in comics. They were doing different genres that they wanted to have some concepts that were still slated in the superhero genre of comics. So Robert Kirkman came up with Invincible, and it's definitely one of the best comic book series I've ever read. You really owe it to yourself. If you've never read Invincible before, you will enjoy the hell out of it, especially if you are a long time comic book fan. Because one of the things I enjoy about Invincible is that it takes classic comic book tropes, so things that you might see in your classic comics like Justice League or Teen Titans, but they take those concepts and they flip them on their head so much. Like just like the Walking Dead comic book, there's so many twists and turns and unexpected things that happen from month to month. It harkens back to a style of comic book writing that you really don't see anymore. Everything is so concentrated on the meta story that you don't get great month to month adventures. But Invincible gave you that. And like I said, during some of the I got into Invincible during that economic downturn in 2008, 2009. And obviously, losing my job and being laid off and everything, you get very depressed. So, finding a comic book like Invincible to read, like I found a bunch of back issues and some newer issues I read online. And I have to tell you, it was one of those things that always lifted my spirit to read that book every month. It helped me through a lot. So, I have a great appreciation for Invincible. For those who don't know what the story is, it's about a young man named Mark Grayson, and he becomes the superhero Invincible. He inherits his powers from his father, Omni-Man, and his father is almost kind of like a Superman analog, where he's an alien from another planet, and he's kind of passed these powers on to his son. Now, spoiler alert, but I mean we get to this pretty soon in the series if you've never read it, but you should know this if you know a little bit about Invincible. Spoiler alert, that Omni-Man is actually part of this intergalactic empire that is conquering the universe, and how they do it is they go to a planet, find a mate, and create more of them, and then they take over that planet. And that's what Omni-Man was supposed to do. And he even tries to do it, but his son Invincible actually stops him. And through that, Invincible becomes the world's biggest superhero. So I'll leave it at that as far as the most spoilers I'll give for this series and for this comic book concept. But like that's one of the basic things you should know about it, because even in some of the synopsis they put that out there. But what I'm saying is they'll take a lot of classic stories that you remember from either Marvel or DC, and they'll kind of take that and flip it on its head later on. There are some stories like, at first Invincible starts out as part of a group that's kind of like the Teen Titans, and he has lasting relationships with these characters. There's scenes where, there was a time where Invincible had to leave the mantle of Invincible, and he left it to someone else, another a black superhero, and he kind of gave him the mantle of Invincible, and that black character was Invincible for a couple of issues. So it was almost like, Hal Jordan passing on the torch of a character to John Stewart. There's also some of the issues with some of the villains in this are interesting. I like the villains a lot, But it's funny how they become Invincible's villains. Like they're the one of the main villains he has. He almost became a villain by accident, and he hates Invincible by accident. Like there really is no real reason when you look at the actual backstory. But this villain causes so much havoc. Even he's done some real terrible things in this book, but you know, it's pretty much a misunderstanding of how he becomes Invincible's greatest villain. Like it's almost like a serial killer gets obsessed with somebody because they thought this person slighted them. And he was, this black scientist who wanted to help Invincible, and somehow Invincible causes the accident. And he thinks that, Invincible is the worst person in the world. And they actually go into this later on in the series where they actually have a talk, and Invincible's trying to figure out, like, why do you hate me so much? It doesn't make any sense. And just like I said, just stuff like that, like they take kind of like a Silver Age story like that, or that the ridiculous plot from Amazing Spider-Man 2, and they kind of flip it on its head. There's even a point where Invincible is having a fight with one of his villains and realizes that the villain is right and actually decides to help him. I'm not going to reveal which villain that is, but if anyone's read the series, they know what I'm talking about. But like I said, the story goes in some very interesting places. It never goes where you think it's going to go. And, even though it's a superhero story, the thing I like about it the most, folks, is the violence. The violence in this series is off the chain. So if you have a weak stomach, do not read Invincible. You think it's just by the way it's drawn, it's just going to be typical superhero action, but it goes there. It goes there of having two superheroes with the same power level fighting each other. And like I said, some of the violence is so over the top. Ryan Oatley does a great job at this. You'll get grossed out by some of the things you might see. But like I said, I'm interested to see how the animated series pulls this off. Like, I was not a fan of the Walking Dead show. I enjoyed the comic a lot, but I felt like the show kind of went so far off the mark as far as the comic book. I know a lot of people love it. I was never a fan of it. So I stopped watching it after season 3. But the comic book was always something I really loved and enjoyed, and how it was serialized. So I'm eager to see what they do with this series. I'm glad it's animated. I'm glad it's not live action, because I think they can do a lot more with the fact that this is an animated feature. And they got Stephen Yeun, who played on The Walking Dead. He played Glenn. He's going to be doing the main character of Mark Grayson as the voice. And J.K. Simmons is going to be Omni-Man. So I'm really looking forward to how this all works out. I think this could be a great animated series, and I'm glad it's coming on Amazon Prime, so they'll be able to show when the series takes those violent turns, they'll be able to show stuff like that. Like I said, I'm just real eager to see what they do with this. It's one of the few projects that I'm looking forward to from, I guess you could say, mainstream Hollywood type media. Everything else to me is kind of blasé, and I'm not really excited about it, but because the comic book series Invincible meant so much to me, I'm looking forward to it. Now, I hope that doesn't make this a disappointment. I'm hoping that me being so hyped and loving the comic book, that doesn't wind up making this show a disappointment to me. But I'm going to try to just relax and watch the show and watch it for what it is and enjoy the adventures of Invincible. If you're a fan of Invincible, let me know in the comments section. You can share some of your stories of Invincible if you've enjoyed reading the comic book. Like I said, it's one of the best comic books I've read in years. It still holds the top 5 spot, in my opinion, of comic books that have come out in the last couple of years. They did way better. It's way better than the stuff you would read in DC and Marvel. But ironically, it could not exist without the classic stories of DC and Marvel. You know what I'm saying? Because like I said, it takes so much stuff that are analogs and so many types of stories and flips them on their head that just for, I guess as a casual reader of it, you would enjoy it. But for someone who's a comic fan, you get so much more out of it. You're like, oh, I kind of recognize what that is, or I kind of recognize what that character is supposed to represent. So that's what I mean. It's not biting in a terrible way or a corny way, but you kind of get the idea of where they might have gotten the story from. Like I said, they have a whole analog for the Justice League, and they have a whole analog for the Teen Titans, and you get to see how these characters progress and grow. It's almost sometimes you wish these are stories they could have done in DC, but they wouldn't want to do that because they'd be ruining their stable of characters. But with a series like this, you can do these outlandish stories with a character that's kind of like Superman, or a character that's kind of almost like Batman, or a character that's almost kind of like Nick Fury, and you're not really ruining that main character to the point where you would upset fan base and upset the corporations that are in control. With Image, it's creator owned, so the creators can do whatever they want. Anyway, like I said, you guys let me know how you feel about it, and I hope you've enjoyed seeing some of the images from the series. This is some of the artwork that's going to be of the character designs that are going to be in the show. And you guys can go check it out for yourselves. Anyway, this is Chris Crazy House signing out. Peace.